everyone, Reaper here again with another video. This time it is a tag video set out into the community by Luther Manning. It's basically, he tagged everybody, and it's basically a tag where you could talk about other things that you're into, other hobbies that you have, other than comic books. I thought that this was such a great idea from Patrick that I just had to jump on this, and I think it's great because it gives everyone in the community a chance to see, behind the long box, so to speak. See that we have other interests and hobbies and so forth, whether it be reading or collecting vinyl records, and so many other things. Now, for those that watch, thank you once again, Patrick. Super excited about this. So for those of you that watch my videos, my other hobbies, collecting video games, playing video games. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. So I have a bunch of things I want to show you. I'm still planning to do my history of video game, my history with video games. That's that's going to be more of a deeper look into, what I was collecting, what was going on at the time, similar to my comic book collecting history videos. But this is just mainly showing some of the things that I really, really like, that you're probably not going to see in those videos as much. Alright, so once again, thank you again, Patrick, for putting out this really unique tag. There are a lot of tags that go around the community, and I think this was really a unique one. So, one of the things that Patrick said, though, in his video is that, sometimes people don't put out these type of videos, like other things that they're interested in, because, the view count may not be that high and so forth. And, I understand that, that's one of the reasons why I don't do it. And it's not so much because of the view count. It's because I think we're all in this community, the comic book community, because we like to share this hobby with everybody, right? Maybe some people that are involved in our lives are maybe not that much into comic books. So you go on YouTube, and it's a way to share your hobby with others that have similar interests as you, maybe some that don't have the same interest in you in comic book collecting, but we're all under the same comic book community, same comic book family. There are times that we may disagree with each other, or may get into arguments with each other, but I'd like to think that we're still part of the same family. Almost like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You go see Thor, then you go see Guardians of the Galaxy. Well, everyone comes together in the Avengers, right? So that's what I would like to think that this community is like. We all have our separate channels, but we can all come together on certain things. And comic book collecting is a passion for a lot of us. So that being said, some of us do have other passions, and we like to share it with other people, and we like to get responses. We like to see that people who may not have interest in these other hobbies, whether it be video game collecting or whatever, like to see that people are engaged or interested in learning more about that hobby, or interested in learning more about that person. So, where to begin? I have a whole load of stuff to show you. I will try to make this somewhat quick. I say that all the time, and it usually is not quick. I'll talk briefly about certain things, and I'll talk at length about a few things, okay? My video game, the first video game that I ever seen, let me rephrase that. The first Nintendo game, because that's really what started it for me, Nintendo, okay? I've known other video game systems and all that stuff, but it was really Nintendo that made me a gamer, okay? The first Nintendo game that I saw played, and I'll elaborate more on this in my video game history video coming out soon. When, maybe a week or two, I don't know, is this. Oh, sorry, glare. Excitebike. I first saw this at my cousin Cindy's house. You'll hear more about cousin Cindy because she's the one that introduced me to video games. This was the first Nintendo game I saw played, and I was enamored with it. I knew Atari and the ColecoVision, and I didn't like really either of those systems, but when I saw this, I was like, wow, this looks so cool. And in true cousin Cindy tradition, she was playing it, and I said, oh, could I try? And she said no. But one of the first games that I got when I finally got the Nintendo, and I'll talk more about that in the history video when I got it, one of the first games I got that day, that I still have to this very day, Kung Fu. It's a little dirty, but I've had this game since 1988. It's almost 30 years old, for Christ's sake. But it still works. Also, I'll talk about my history with these games, but I had to show them in this video. I've always liked horror movies, okay? And whenever I was a kid and the old Universal movies would come on, like Frankenstein and Dracula, I would watch them. And Castlevania, you're fighting Dracula, you're fighting the Mummy, you're fighting Frankenstein, all the Universal monsters. So naturally, I was attracted to this video game series, which evolved past that, of course. But Simon's Quest, I know a lot of people don't like Simon's Quest because it was so different, but it was unique in a way. And it returned to its roots with Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse. Great games. I'm winding down with Nintendo before I move on to the next system. Oh, before I continue, if you're going to, I know there's a lot of hype with this SNES Mini and the Nintendo Mini from last year, but if you want to own an original Nintendo system, you could get the classic gray box, or you could get the classic gray box with Rob the Robot. If you don't know what those things are, but you're interested, look them up because it's too much to get into here. This is the one you want. This is the model. This is called the Top Loader Nintendo. You know how sometimes you put a Nintendo cartridge in the system and it would blink and you would have to go through hellfire and brimstone to get the damn thing started? Well, with these you do not, because they made it. Sorry, hit this. They made it where the pins connect with the board in here much better. And of course, it comes with the dog bone controller. It's a little different than the regular standard Nintendo controller, but this is the system you want, and it'll run you over $100 on eBay. You could possibly get it cheaper somewhere else, maybe a gaming group or flea market or whatever, but it's a good, reliable Nintendo. For those of you that are really into Nintendo or want to get into Nintendo collecting, this is the system to get. Okay, where did I want to go? I want to finish up Nintendo. So Nintendo was a really important system to me, and this is where I developed my hobby and my love for video game collecting. Video game collecting predates my comic book collecting by about 5 years. So, and it's still around too. Who could forget the wonderful Mega Man games? I have other Mega Man games, but these are the ones I just want to show. Mega Man 2, which got me into Mega Man. Mega Man 3, which is my favorite. I got over Christmas 1990. And this is not a Mega Man game, but Batman, which was a great game, and of course the super popular Super Mario Bros. 3. Last Nintendo game I want to show, of course, this should be on anyone's list for getting Nintendo games, the original Legend of Zelda. So, where to go from there? Well, since I was a Nintendo fan, I mainly wanted to stick with Nintendo. That only lasted for a little while. So when the Super Nintendo came out, I was super ecstatic. I'm not going to show any of the loose games. I'll just show some of the box games I have, okay? Starting with the original wrapper is still on these. When Cousin Cindy was also the one that introduced me to this method. Whenever I would buy a game, the ones that came in these boxes, I would stick my thumbnail like this in the corner to open up the plastic and then slowly rip it off to just cover the flap, and I would leave the rest of the plastic on. I did that for every boxed game since late 80s. So even though the boxes are a little crushed because they were stacked up on top of each other, over time, but if I were to take the sleeve off, it would be smooth and no blemishes on it. For more or less. So this was the Zelda game that came out, Link to the Past, often cited as the best Zelda. Some may agree, some may disagree. Mega Man X. Got this back in 1994 at Electronics Boutique for $59.99. What is that in today's dollars? A lot. These are some games that you'll see on that Super Nintendo Mini that everyone's overspending on. Star Fox. I don't have Star Fox 2 because it never came out, but oh well. Donkey Kong Country, their second best-selling game under the Super Nintendo. Contra 3. And, of course, Mortal Kombat 2. The best version of Mortal Kombat, in my opinion. Mortal Kombat 2. Well, I have like a ton of systems, and I'm obviously not going to show them all. We're already approaching the 9-minute mark, but for those that are still interested, great. I'm glad. I eventually wound up getting this monstrosity, the Sega Genesis and the Sega CD Model 1. Eventually I caved and I got the Sega Genesis because I was a big fan of Nintendo, and now I'm more of a Sega fan years later, but it came with this. Remember Sonic the Hedgehog? I got this for Christmas back in 1992, a few months before I officially became a comic book collector. Captain America and the Avengers. It's like a beat-em-up game like Double Dragon or stuff like that. It's really cool. And it was in the arcade, so maybe some of you have played it. Now, this Mortal Kombat was the best. The first Mortal Kombat was the best on the Genesis because it had the blood and it was easier to play. And caused so much controversy because of that. Ooh, there's blood in a video game. Head for the hills. This is a very special game. Shining in the Darkness. This is an RPG game where you have first-person view and you pretty much go through dungeons and solve quests and get experience and level up your characters. This was the first in the Shining series. For those that are gamers, you know what the Shining series is. This was the very first one, Shining in the Darkness. And of course, I got this in when it first came out, when I just became a comic book collector and I was collecting because of X-Men. I got the X-Men game, which I thought was really good. And eventually the much better sequel. Sometimes you see these back here, as you can see there are gaps. Moving along. To close, when it comes to the Genesis and the Super Nintendo, I think both systems are really good. I think Super Nintendo edges out a little bit more because of sometimes the graphics were better and the sound was better on that. But there was a reason why the sound was better on Super Nintendo. Because Nintendo was working with Sony, and Sony put their chips, their music chips or whatever they're called, into the Super Nintendo. So every time you hear Super Nintendo, the music is much better than the Genesis. The Genesis almost sounds like whenever there's a voice in it, it sounds like it has a sore throat, where Super Nintendo is much clearer, largely because of Sony. And we have to thank Nintendo for one of the biggest blunders in video game history, which led to this. The Sony PlayStation. Does anyone know the history of the Sony PlayStation? I'm asking you as if you're going to answer me. Well, I showed you the Sega CD a few moments ago, right? Well, the Sega CD was the second video game system to have a CD-based media. Okay? Now, Sega was always trying to get over on Nintendo. So they came out with a CD-based system for better music, which it did have, better graphics, which it didn't have, and other things. The very first video game system that came out that was CD-based was the Turbo Duo, or the TurboGrafx 16 CD. It didn't sell well here in the United States, but it did give me one of my favorite Castlevanias, Rondo of Blood. So Nintendo was trying to compete, and for many years Sony was partnered with them, and they were working on a CD-based system together, and they were going to unveil it, I think in 1991, a video game showcase or whatever the hell it was called, and it was supposed to be called the Nintendo PlayStation. Well, Nintendo got a little worried and feared that Sony was going to take a lot of their trademarks and all that, so they went with another company and left Sony out in the cold. This really angered Sony, so they went to Sega and saying, well, maybe we could partner up with you. They felt that Sony didn't have enough experience in the video game system, so they said no. Both companies, Nintendo and Sega, made this big blunder, which led to the creation of the PlayStation. The PlayStation later destroyed Sega, and it pretty much destroyed Nintendo. I mean, I know they released that Switch, but Nintendo's never been the same since the Super Nintendo. Yeah, I would hardly say that Switch is better than the PlayStation 4. So that's what led to the creation of the PlayStation. It was originally supposed to be called the Nintendo PlayStation. Good job, Nintendo. Bunch of idiots. Let's get to the PlayStation. Some of you may have started collecting games with the PlayStation. The very first game I got was Mortal Kombat Trilogy. I loved Mortal Kombat. And this was the main reason why I got Sony PlayStation. Because the one on the N64 was not that good. And to me, the N64, which was the successor to the Super Nintendo, was a big disappointment. Oh wait. There's a couple other things I want to show you before I get to Sony. A couple other things. How could I not show you Castlevania for Sega Genesis? And I didn't even show you any Sega CD games. Well, that's a crime, because I love the Sega CD. Remember this one? Night Trap? This is the reason why we have video game ratings. Lunar. Oh, this is Eternal Blue. This is Lunar 2, sorry. Lunar the Silver Star, and its sequel, Lunar 2. And, of course, the very funny Pop Full Mail. Not the easiest games to get if you're a collector. They will run you a lot of money. Fortunately, I was able to get most of them back when video game collecting wasn't cool. So, but we saw Mortal Kombat Trilogy, one of the best games I ever played, Resident Evil. And of course, this is the game that I think pretty much demolished Nintendo, because Final Fantasy was exclusive with Nintendo. Well, when Nintendo said with the N64, we're going to stick with cartridges, Squaresoft, the people that make Final Fantasy, said, no, we're going to go with CD, and we're going to go with PlayStation. So, another nail in Nintendo's coffin. The very first strategy game I played, Final Fantasy Tactics, great game. Not for beginners, though. Who can forget the awesome Tekken series? Tekken is actually a response to Virtua Fighter. Sega made Virtua Fighter, and so Namco made Tekken for PlayStation, Sony. And I think it's a much better series personally. And the last two original PlayStation games I want to show: Suikoden 1 and Suikoden 2. This is it's not as expensive as it used to be. But, the reason why it's so expensive is because people didn't buy it. I was the only one that, at the store, that pre-ordered it back in 1999. It was like $39.99, and the guy told me I was the only one that pre-ordered it. So, not bad. I'm not going to talk too much about other systems, because I could be here for, it's already 17 minutes, and I just want to, I'm just trying to show my passion for this hobby and how it's expanded. As you can see behind me, and there's another wall, and there's drawers that have so many games that you don't even see. But one of my favorite systems is this, the Sega Saturn. Now, this is a modded Japanese version. The US versions are black, but I thought that this was a really cool one. This can play all regions, PAL regions, Japan, and North American games. So I just want to show a few Saturn games before I close this video. I mean, there's so many other systems I collect for, and I'll talk more about those at length in my video game history. Mr. Bones, a really difficult game, but really wacky for the Sega Saturn. Dragon Force by Working Designs, the same people that made the Lunar series, one of my favorite companies of all time, and one of my favorite games on the Sega Saturn. A game I'm currently working on. Remember I talked about Shining in the Darkness? Well, this is Shining Force 3. Shining in the Darkness came out, and the sequel was Shining Force. Then Shining Force 2, Shining Force 3. Then they had a sequel, Shining the Holy Ark. There's a ton of Shining games. But for those that are not into video games, you're not going to know what the hell I'm talking about. And another game I'm working on, Panzer Dragoon Saga. Now, this is an expensive game. I was fortunate enough to get it many, many years ago, when, like I said, when video game collecting wasn't cool, or wasn't mainstream as it is today, I should say. Now, a complete copy of this could probably run you, I don't know, it depends, anywhere between $400 to $700, I think. Yeah, good luck. And that's pretty much it. That's my passion. I mean, I collect Xbox 360, I collect PlayStation 2, 3, 4, but it's really the earlier ones, the real retro games that I have a passion for, that I love playing. I play more of those than the modern stuff, although I do play modern stuff. But Sega is probably one of my favorite favorite companies of all time, and I really spend a lot of time playing the Genesis and the Sega Saturn. That is my hobby. That is my passion, along with the comic books. They go together. It's fun to see some of these games that I had purchased way back when, around the time that I was buying comic books, like the X-Men game and so forth, knowing what comic books I was buying at that time. That ties into my comic book collecting year one. It's a real nice trip down memory lane. As Luther Manning says, although these are not paper time machines, these are probably CD or cartridge time machines or plastic time machines or whatever you want to call it. I'm sure Luther could come up with a way better thing to say. But I'm just going to tag everybody, whoever watched this video, whoever stuck with me through almost 20 minutes of this, you deserve an award for that. But yeah, I would love to see what what you collect, what other passions you have. I like reading too, but I'm not going to go over all the books I like to read. I like Charles Dickens. I really do, and especially around this time of year, I like to read A Christmas Carol. I love reading that. It's so well written, in my opinion. But yeah, that's my sometimes comics and video games. They almost tie sometimes. Sometimes I like comics more. Sometimes I like video games more. But both hobbies definitely take me away from things that are going on in the world. For those of you that follow what's going on in the world, politics or whatever, it's just like if you sit back and you collect a comic book and it takes you out of that moment, or you play a video game that has a decent story, like a Suikoden game or whatever, or an old game that reminds you of your childhood. It takes you out of that situation, no matter what things you're going through at that time, at that point in your life. So that's why these two hobbies of mine, comic book collecting, video games, are so important and are still with me, 30 years, right? And I would imagine that's why it's with most of you. Either you're a new collector or an old collector. You find some sort of love for these things that keeps you going, that gives you that little boost throughout the day, and that puts a smile on your face. Take care, everyone. Bye.